Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Boost Your Biology podcast. Today, I am joined in with a very special guest, actually, a very last minute organization. This sort of came about, in the last probably 24 hours. And I sort of connected with Casey through um, the admin of a very big Facebook group, the official Nootropics Facebook group through Adam. So, Casey, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Lucas. And hello, everyone. Yeah, it was a bit of a last minute thing, but it's really cool to find another bunch of people that we can talk to about really interesting and weird stuff.
Yeah,
It's always good.
it is. It is. It's fun to connect with other sort of like-minded people, and it's good to share ideas. So maybe, Casey, do you want to give my listeners a little bit of a summary into, I guess, your journey and where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Um, Basically, I never thought that I'd be in this position that I'm in now, and it's kind of I've been pushed into it, partly by economics and also by way of seeing my daughter go through some things that I went through as a kid. Initially, I was looking for a solution for people with cognitive issues. So people like myself, I had ADHD. I've got autism as well. So they both come with difficulties in planning and organizing and things like that. And it was only once my daughter came along and she's also got autism and ADHD that it was a real drive to start working on something that would help her so she didn't have to go through what I went through, struggling with high school and primary school and everything else. And then the science industry collapsed in Australia. So all my colleagues and I were kind of pushed out into unemployment. So suddenly my side startup project became a real priority. So, and that's where it comes to today. So we've gone from initially looking at trying to make a better EEG, so an electroencephalogram, so the electrical measurement, to now building first line sensors that not only can measure brain activity, but also be used in whole body monitoring. So yeah, it's pretty cool the way things have evolved right from the start. So especially now that we're starting to realize that our whole body is part of our cognition. So being able to measure all of it and see how it all interacts together in a quantitative way, it's going to be really, really cool.
Yeah, interesting. Did you want to sort of maybe backtrack and give my listeners a bit of an understanding into maybe, first of all, what neurofeedback is?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I apologize for the slightly disorganized manner. So it just it's such an interesting topic. Sometimes I kind of get a bit sidetracked by the little bits and details.
Yeah.
Basically, neurofeedback is that, just kind of imagine what if you've ever seen a baby trying to learn how to move their hands, or where they're really trying to focus on something and they just can't do it, and they just try and repeat that process. The process by which they learn that is a form of neurofeedback. When you have a feedback from something, some kind of sense in your external environment, so whether that's a physical or a touch or a heat, all of those are neurofeedbacks. But the true definitions now around neurofeedback being giving you feedback on the way that your brain is functioning. So it's a way of super optimizing your like a meditation style of learning about how your brain is functioning by actually giving you physical feedback on what's happening inside.
Mm. Yeah, well, I actually want to share my experience. Like a few years back, actually, probably around 5 years ago, one of my friends was studying like neuroscience, and he was looking for volunteers to conduct some neurofeedback training on. And I
Oh, awesome.
obviously put my hand up as a lab rat and volunteered myself. And yeah, I think I remember I did probably 12 sessions altogether.
Wow.
And I actually wasn't sure what he was trying to learn from me. I wasn't sure what
Yeah,
his
yeah.
objective was, but I do remember some of the activities and the tasks where I had to like, it was like a line bar, and I had to sort of keep it within like the same, within a certain threshold by my
Yeah,
thought.
yeah.
And I was really, yeah, captivated by that process. And
I
I was
know,
like,
it's like magic, isn't it?
yeah,
Being able to do something like that.
yeah,
And what we want to do is take that fascination and turn that into a game
mm,
where you can actually become like, you can actually have magical powers in a game or in a VR environment.
mm,
Just the amount of motivation that provides.
mm,
And we know that based on some of the new findings now, that you need motivation to make those new connections. You
yeah,
need a motivation factor. So it's like when they do the spinal regeneration experiments, they did them where people were having their legs moved and they get stimulation on either side of the broken location. But unless they're actually mentally focusing on, I am walking, I'm going towards this place, they didn't get as much nerve regrowth. And
wow,
I thought that is really fascinating, that there's a certain level of, it's not so, I'm not saying that motivation is a, how do you define a motivation? But wanting something, a desire to go somewhere or do something, has a bigger effect on our brain than we might realize.
mm.
I
How does
think
that?
that's just really
Yeah,
cool.
I find that fascinating as well. I want to know more about, because obviously you seem to have specialized mostly in the like autism and ADHD sort of space. So I'm curious to know like what you've like. Tell me about your journey with like ADHD. Share that with my
Yeah,
listeners.
sure. I mean, and what we're doing isn't necessary. It isn't just for autism and ADHD. I mean, they're at the core of things, because for me, it gets me past the terrifying thing of switching from being a strict medical researcher to becoming someone who has to think about business and how to talk to people and everything else. This stuff is really helpful for people with no problems in their mind,
Mm,
with no issues in connecting, in the connections inside. It improves everyone. But for me, the focus has been trying to find why it is that we're doing it, to help people initially to help with their conditions, and then from there to enhance whoever wants to be, and to do it in a way where if they want to stop, they just take the device off. I
so
particularly like.
so so
I
this
didn't answer your question yet.
yeah, this device. So do you want to explain, to backtrack another step, with what is this device, and is it something that you've constructed from scratch? Like, tell us more about that.
The device it's basically a sensor that measures the blood flow inside your brain in a similar way to an MRI, but without having to have the superconducting magnets all around you. So it's the same process, and we know that blood flow in the brain equates to brain activity. So more blood flow or better blood flow equals better brain function. But also, whenever you think or use a part of your brain, blood rushes towards it very, very quickly. So it's a fraction of a second and the blood flow changes. So it's 1/10 of a, no, It's about 10 milliseconds, and the blood changes location. So we've got really good blood flow inside the brain, and actually that's one of the big causes of dementia, where brain damage is caused by small vessels inside the brain that getting broken down by high blood pressure, or just the aging process reducing the flexibility of vessels. So the headset is a way of measuring that activity, and so we reference, well, what's the activity now and what's it changing to? Is it, if we're at this point, and what's changed in this location? So we're trying to see how things are changing, but looking at all of them at the same time. So it becomes a machine learning problem of, okay, this person wants to do this in their game, but we also want to optimize this part of the brain. So how do we do that while making the game still fun? So we're in the process of building the sensor at the moment. We've just started our industrial design, and it scares me that there's a lot more to go yet, but it's nice to have a design that we get our industrial designers really excited about. So that's encouraging for me, because I know that they've been doing it for a lot of years. So yeah, getting there.
Yeah. So in terms of that, like, do you get like a visual representation of the, like, how does it track somebody's like the blood flow?
Well, how it works is it's a bit like radar. So what we're using is it's a near infrared system. So we can use low powered near infrared at certain wavelengths, and that will actually travel up to 8 centimeters inside the brain. And then we measure how much energy comes back. And depending on how much energy comes back, we can tell how much blood is in that particular area of the brain. So it's like you send a little tiny pulse, and you measure the echoes that come back, and subtract all of the background information, like the way that when you have a heartbeat, the blood flows through. So you've got to time it between heartbeats. But basically, yeah, it measures. You will be able to see different areas of the brain kind of changing as you change your thinking. And I noticed that one thing that really struck me was something we hadn't thought about. My co-founder and I, Amy Rose, we were talking to a couple of psychologists, and they got really excited, because they thought, well, if I have this on one of my patients and I give them a screen, they can actually see what's happening in their brain as they're going through the therapy. Or we can see, if they see what's happening in that traumatic situation when we're describing it, it might be their key moment where they go, oh my God, when I think about this, or when I'm worrying about this particular thing, look at what happens in my head. It's real. That really is a physical thing that's happening. So it's kind of a way of translating something that's currently something that you can't really control, because you don't have sensory neurons inside the brain. You don't have a feeling. It takes a lot of effort and concentration to learn and to be aware of how your brain's functioning.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating, and in particular, when we look at compounds like L-theanine, are you probably familiar with how that affects like EEG readings and stuff like that?
I hadn't heard about EEG readings, no. So I'm kind of a bit new to the nootropics side of things. I've had some exposure to it. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, because we're already doing that with we already supplement our cognition with so many things. I mean, even nicotine, we're increasing the nicotinic receptors inside the brain. And I mean, that's why it's such a terrible withdrawal when you try and go off a nicotine when you've been smoking or vaping or anything else. It's because it makes your nerves reduce their connections. And things like even a blood sugar regulation type medication can seriously change your cognition. Don't get me started on Trump and dexamethasone, because that stuff is it's like it really messes with your cognition so badly.
Dexamethasone, the is it anti-cortisol?
It's a steroid, a corticosteroid. Yeah.
Yep.
So it affects the cortisol system, but it also causes really elevated mood. It makes you feel fantastic even if you're dying. Like you can, if you're on a high enough dose of that stuff, you'll feel fine even if your legs falling off, because it boosts your dopamine and serotonin so high. I mean, I actually had some experience when I had to take it for autoimmune condition, but I had a couple of specialists that saw that I had ADHD and thought, oh well, you're just taking it because of the high you get, because it boosts the same system that has an issue with in ADHD. Because with ADHD, it's low dopamine levels being produced, and cortisol. That same cortisol system is really integrally linked with dopamine. So yeah, dexamethasone can turn a someone who just gambles a little bit into a seriously high level gambler. But then so can a deep brain stimulation system that isn't calibrated right, because that's what they're finding now with people with Parkinson's, that if they don't calibrate their system right, they can turn people into just people who just can't stop gambling. There's actually been some really big legal cases, I think in the US, I'm not sure in Australia, but where people have gambled away all their life savings after they've had their Parkinson's deep brain stimulation.
What do you mean by the Parkinson's deep brain? Is it, you mean they've actually undergone treatment, or?
Yeah. I mean, with Parkinson's, you can have some people have miraculous results from deep brain stimulation. So it's like the version 1.0 of Neuralink, the Elon Musk system, where the deep brain stimulation, basically they stick probes into the brain at the points where they know are an issue for the person's Parkinson's. So in the motor center, and they use a slight electrical current to stimulate that area to produce more dopamine, and they can transform the lives of people who can't sleep because they're shaking so much. I mean, they can do it just basically at the flick of a switch. They can turn their tremor off or turn it back on. So as soon as they turn that stimulator off, the shaking comes back. But the downside is that if they don't calibrate it right, or if it's slightly too much dopamine, they make the person too euphoric, and they start thinking, well, I can do anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
almost
that's the downside of something that works too well to boost your mood, is that it deregulates your mood. You need a level of anxiety. That's what I've found with my ADHD medications, because one makes me very focused, and the other one makes me very anxious and focused. But I need kind of both of them, because if I don't have the anxiety, I won't get things done. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I mean, I've experimented with like many dopamine-based nootropics. A lot of the ones that actually increase the norepinephrine and adrenaline, the ones that do make you a bit more anxious, they're the ones that do get me fired up to work and to to really like crunch a task, sort of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I mean. There needs to be a certain level of worry, I guess.
Yeah.
But you don't want it to be too much. It's like any kind of regulation system in our body, they're always finely regulated. So whenever I hear someone talking about like the crazy kind of theories about blood acidification and things like that, as soon as you hear that, you know that they can't possibly make any sense, because our body regulates itself so precisely that if your blood changes pH even a little bit, you'll get very, very sick. And if you try and change it, you can't. It's just too good a system. It's too resilient to change.
So, Casey, I'm curious to know more about some of the clinical trials. I want to know more about some of the clinical trials that have been conducted so far, sort of in this space.
I don't know if there's been many neurofeedback clinical trials on the style of system that we're working on, but there has been a lot over the years. I mean, to be honest, when I first heard about this, about neurofeedback, I thought it had to be insane, because at the time I was a scientist, and whenever you see a result that looks too good to be true, it's kind of, well, really? I don't think I believe this. This can't be true. I'm going to look into it a bit more, and that's kind of what got me into it. So it was a study in untreatable epilepsy. So patients with epilepsy that had been gone through every single medication and other therapy, and had no response and no reduction in their seizure activity. And they had an 80% remission rate in their seizures after doing neurofeedback training. And I thought that seemed too big a deal for me not to go and look into it. And then it became, oh, well, this can be used to help people improve their planning and organizing ability. This can help with memory. And then as the years have gone on, and that was about 20 years ago, it's taken me that long before I'm kind of really confident in it. And I guess it's kind of tied in with everyone else, because it's only just been certified as a therapeutic hospital treatment. So it's now recognized worldwide as a legitimate therapy for ADHD, that's a really big deal. It takes so much evidence for that to happen. So it gives me confidence that because the worst thing that I could think of would be to make something that didn't have that kind of background and didn't have the support of the evidence. Because that was another motivator for this, because one of the systems I tested was with an EEG colleague of mine, and I thought it was a really inspiring kind of system, and found, oh, well, it doesn't pass any of the basic EEG tests. It doesn't do anything. It's just measuring noise. And I was so disappointed, and it felt like such a betrayal. I'd really hate to do that to people. I mean, there's so few things that seem real so much of the time these days. Everything seems to be surface. For me, it's really important to make something that really gives people a real thing. It'd be horrible for me for that not to be the case.
Of course, yeah. What about some? I'm curious to know, like, even leading up to this sort of treatment, this sort of protocol, what else did you explore in terms of improving ADHD?
Well, I initially, I got diagnosed with autism at 23, and then ADHD at 33. I mean, at the time when I had the the autism diagnosis, it was kind of, oh, well, I've got to go back and rewrite everything, everything in the way I thought about what things were like as a kid, and why this was so hard, or why I didn't understand these things. But then as I kind of progressed after that, it was kind of, well, why am I still struggling with so many things around concentration? Why am I having issues with planning and everything else? One thing I did find was helpful was ginkgo
Yeah.
biloba. I found
Gink-
that was quite helpful for the ADHD symptoms. That was the main one, I think. It was something that I kind of really struggled with. And it was only once I started like experimenting with the official ADHD medications that I found a real benefit. I mean, caffeine does help, but not. It has to be finely balanced. You can't have too much.
Yeah.
You can't have too little. Pure, like really pure chocolate is quite good. I found for me, like, but only certain types of chocolate. I mean, if it's, and also if it was 85%, too much anxiety. But if it's 70%, that's the fine line for me. But I know that if it's someone else, it might be they need 85%. And it's the same with ADHD medications. It takes quite a long time to find the one that mixes for you.
Yeah.
But I could definitely recommend, if anyone has any issues around concentration and motivation, that it might be worth at least getting checked out. And the one that's really, really helped has been Strattera. I think it's atomoxetine. It really does help. It's a non-stimulant one. Doesn't work for everyone, but it kind of helps all the time. Versus with a stimulant medication, once it wears off, you kind of lose that focus that you can have. So I'm sure that your listeners would know the difference between when they have an effective dose of what they're using and when they don't. It's exactly the same with ADHD. When you run out of that medication, you run out of sometimes it's the irony of not being able to concentrate enough to take the medication that helps you concentrate. I often think that's pretty funny.
Yeah. That's interesting because the Strattera, the tamoxetine, the mechanism of action, it appears to be a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which is similar to ginkgo, like you said before. And that's funny because ginkgo also has that norepinephrine reuptake. Very interesting.
Yeah, but it's always worth knowing that it takes experimentation with trialing different medications, even for people doing it via a formal psychologist or psychiatrist, that it takes a long time to tailor medications to people. And it's the same thing for nootropics. What works for you or your twin, even for your twin, may not work the same, because as the twin, even if you're genetically identical, as you grow up, the connections inside your brain change so significantly that you really aren't the same at all on the inside. And you won't respond the same necessarily to all the same medication at the same dose. So it's really important that people know that it's the same for antidepressants. That, I mean, there's so many, partly because it's a big business, but also because there's so many different responses in people. And the interesting thing is going to be, as they start to look at the genetics and trying to work out which ones are going to work the best for different people. And I think they'll do the same. They should be doing the same for nootropics in future, because it's becoming so cheap to do a nootropics. So like a ancestry.com for nootropics response or something like that. I mean, that would be ideal.
Yeah, the thing that I'm using now, I mean, like in terms of tracking my use with nootropics, the best thing that I've done over the years is just create like a simple Excel sheet, and then you rank, according to focus, concentration, memory, attention. I know it's very subjective, but I
Yeah, I
think it's,
mean, but
hmm,
but you have practice over time in trying to observe what happens, and if you can at least try and step away from it, you can at least try and be as objective as possible.
hmm,
And that's all that you can do with most medications, and the nootropics fit into that same category. I mean, that's how any medication works. You've got to try it and try it at a reasonably low dose, and then work up to the dose that works best,
hmm,
or taper down if it doesn't work at a higher dose.
hmm,
But also be aware of the toxicity if you go too high.
hmm. And also a lot of the cofactors as well. Like there's a lot of things that can be depleted with a lot of the nootropics, B vitamins, especially omega-3s, iron, zinc, magnesium. They're all essential
Cool.
as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have those on supply, the body will take them from somewhere else.
Mm,
I mean, it's just like the extreme example is when a woman's pregnant. If she doesn't have the nutrients in her blood, enough calcium in her blood to supply the baby, the body will take it out of her bones and out of her teeth and put it into the baby.
mm,
It's the same because our brain takes priority over most of our other body systems. I mean, that's why when you get really cold, you get frostbite in your hands, and the body will reroute all of the resources to the brain.
mm,
So we've got a really prioritized system because it's such a survival tool, which I find quite interesting that we preserve the brain over. I mean, yeah, well, we of course we want to keep thinking,
yeah.
but the fact that we've evolved such a protective mechanism around it is
Mm,
quite interesting to me.
mm. What about utilizing artificial intelligence to accelerate learning? I want to know, like, have you done much research in that realm?
Well, that's where Adam and I have started to look into things. That's his current project is called Neurocode, and he's using the Google APIs to and a it's a combination of colors, sound, and repetition to work on the way we memorize things and learn things. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I haven't been able to run it because I've run on a weird phone system that's it's half Android and half an exotic weird system. And next time I'm going to go to something normal, and that way I can actually run his app on my phone. But Amy Rose has run it on hers, and yeah, she's pretty impressed with it. But yeah, we're still developing. I mean, Adam's still working on it, but he's had some pretty impressive preliminary results with it. If anything that can help people to learn more easily and
Yeah.
with less boredom, because he's ADHD and autistic himself, so he's kind of going from a position of, well, he struggles with these things. He wants to find something that's not going to be boring. Because
Yeah.
a big thing with ADHD is we get really bored easily. So if we want to do something, we want to be doing something a bit more active, or at least be really engaged at all times. So I think he's going from that perspective of we've got to engage as much of the brain as possible in the learning process.
Mm. Sort of makes me wonder whether some of the greatest entrepreneurs were actually ADHD.
Well, I mean, it's the same with autism. I mean, it's a spectrum between one and the other. I mean, if you have too much of one, then it's a problem. If you don't have enough, it's also a problem. So there is a certain level of restlessness that can be a good thing in ADHD, but the majority of time it's not really very good at all. It makes life very difficult for people, and there's a really high percentage of people with ADHD and other cognitive issues in the prison systems because they don't have the ability to stop themselves as easily as others. I mean, and that's one of the key diagnostic things. I found out I had ADHD by accident because I did like you do, and I like to be a guinea pig. I like to go and do experiments, and I went and did one like testing they didn't actually say it was an ADHD study, but then like at the midpoint they said, well, you've successfully had a diagnosis of ADHD. Really? Okay, I had no idea. It was kind of knocked me over. It's like, well, that explains a lot. But a lot of their testing was the ability to stop yourself from doing something.
What's an example of that?
Well, they kind of go, it was a screen and you'd have to not click the button when they showed a certain color. Or they'd show 3 colors, and if there was 2 of one, you had to click, and if there was 1, you didn't click. And they kept flipping it around. So yeah. And
so that's basically impulse control, right? Like,
yeah, impulse control is like a key diagnostic criteria for ADHD. So that also it translates into, if you don't have that kind of control, it also means that the ideas flow really easy. Or you might get a million ideas all at once. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to have, because you always feel like, well, I should be putting all these down, but by the time you start to write them, you've already moved on to the next. So winding that kind of too much information down is a really important thing in ADHD medications. But it's the same as we know that art and music are tied to depression and bipolar and other mood disorders like schizophrenia. But it's also that in those conditions, some parts of the brain that are usually really tightly controlled are less tightly controlled. So they're able to create things and think of things and do things that other people couldn't necessarily access just because they're less regulated in those areas. So it'd be very interesting if we're able to teach people how to upregulate and downregulate different parts of their brain and see if that results in improvements in those areas without the larger issues of, because when you have a brain disorder, it's not just that little area that's affected, it's the entire brain. And there's no indication that if you boost one little area that it can trigger those conditions. It's more realizing that when you have those areas downregulated or less controlled, you can be more creative. It's like with THC, it makes people able to find words and have a flow of ideas because it's downregulating the control that they usually have over that process. So it's not only boosting. If you suppress something, you can boost function in other areas. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, that is definitely. I want to go back to some of, even with my own experiments and stuff, there have been times when I've been able to get myself into a headspace where a lot of ideas are flowing, but it's almost like I just feel like every single one of them is like life-changing. Like I just get so enthusiastic and so like charged up by ideas that I almost feel like grandiose.
Yeah. I mean, that is kind of like, it feels like to be unmedicated ADHD in some ways. Not necessarily that you have it, but everyone has those moments where they have a flow of ideas, and it sometimes, sometimes it really is fantastic ideas, and other times it's not, but you can't really tell. You need to write them, you need to record them as much as you can. And in my experience, my guess would be, well, at least from other people I've talked to and for myself, maybe 10% of those ideas are worth following. And then further, maybe 2% of those are going to be the really big ideas. Or maybe you're one of that 1% of the 1%, where those ideas really are, every single one is fantastic. Yeah. I don't know.
Well,
maybe I'm going to that's going to mess with you now. It's going to mess with me. Kind of going, well, maybe those ideas really are good. I mean, it's kind of like when I first heard about 3D printing, I wrote, this was when I was just starting out in my career, I wrote a letter to one of the big journal articles saying, well, can 3D printing be used to print organs? And then like 20 years later, it's like, now they're doing it. And I thought of that. That really was a good idea. It wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what you mean. It's kind of, well, how do you know that they're a crazy idea or not crazy? How do you know if they're unrealistic or whether they're just forward thinking? I think one big area where I found that really helps with that is to read people writing really good, fairly close to the future, close to the current time science fiction. Like people like Charles Gibbs, William Gibson, Charles Stross, and Cory Doctorow. They'd be the three that are really, they've been really close to the mark. I mean, especially Cory Doctorow. He's written some really prescient things about what's happening now in America. I mean, he wrote in 2014 about exactly what's happening in the Black Lives Matter movement, and talking about a regime in America where protesters are treated like criminals, and how they would use the electronics that surround us as their weapons. And it's like that's pretty close to the mark. I mean, he's close to current time. I think that they help guide you on how to think about your ideas and how to be flexible in the way you think. I mean, I found that that's really helpful for me anyway.
Yeah. So Casey, I think what we'll do is we'll definitely get Adam on the next sort of episode just to sort of discuss more about that neurocode. But for my listeners listening in, where can they learn more about your device and your technology that you're working on?
Well, you can easily find us at www.cortexbraintech.com. Or if you're happy to give anyone my contact details, I'm happy for them to contact me directly. I'm always happy to answer any questions or talk to people about ideas or anything. It's always good fun.
Awesome.
But yeah, we're looking for people who might be interested in trialing the headset once, or just with the sensors to play around with them once we're up to the prototype stage. So I hope we're working on getting to that in the next 12 months, hopefully. I mean, that barring anything going wrong, but we really need to get started. We've got so many things to do. So, yeah.
Well, the famous quote is, well, productivity is the art of knowing what not to work on. So just remember that one.
Very good point. I like one from there was a TV series about the guy who developed the rocketry systems, and he had this thing of, well, he had a dream that he had this many prototypes to go, and it was like, his quote was, well, there's only 139 prototypes to go, because I know that 140 is the one.
Yeah.
So he just knew that he had to churn through that many and get to the one that was going to work. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen, because 140 is going to kill me.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up today's episode, Casey. Thanks for joining in very impromptu, last minute.
No, it's great fun.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure having a chat, and I think my audience will have enjoyed some of the things we spoke about. So yeah, I'll definitely for those listening in who want to learn more about Casey's product and his services, I'll be leaving links to those in my description. And also, don't forget to check out my website, ergogenic.health, where I have a range of nootropics that I recommend. I've also built out a couple of webinars there that you guys should check out, a sleep optimization course, and also a testosterone optimization course. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.